The grand lecture spire of the Galactic Knowledge Consortium floated above the capital world like a crystalline crown. Inside, tiered rows of seats curved around a central hollowboard where equations shimmered in shifting dimensions. More than 100 students from dozens of star systems sat in attentive silence, their bodies glowing, clicking, or humming softly according to their biology. At the center of it all stood Instructor Kaelrix, a senior Valar scholar whose species was renowned for computational brilliance. His translucent skin refracted the lecture hall lights into sharp prisms, a visible sign of heightened cognitive focus. Today's topic, probabilistic convergence across higher dimensional systems, was considered one of the most demanding concepts in modern galactic science. Kaelrix spoke with confidence. He had taught this material for over a century. That was when he noticed the human. Elena Ward, seated near the back, wasn't looking at the equations. Her eyes were fixed on the starfield beyond the transparent wall, watching a nebula slowly twist through violet and gold. She didn't look bored, just thoughtful. Kaelrix paused mid-lecture. Humans were recent additions to the consortium. Young. Emotionally expressive. Their sciences were functional but inelegant, built on approximations and brute force computation. Kaelrix had argued against their early academic inclusion more than once. "Miss Ward," he said, his voice amplified by the hall's translators. "Since my lecture seems insufficient to hold your attention, perhaps you would care to demonstrate your understanding." A ripple of interest moved through the room. Several students turned, curious. Others, especially those from calculation-focused species, exchanged knowing glances. The problem Kaelrix summoned onto the hollowboard was infamous, a multi-layered convergence scenario that typically took hours to solve even with assistive processors. This, Kaelrix continued, should be a simple exercise, for those prepared. It was not. Elena looked away from the stars and up at the board. She stood without hesitation and walked to the front, ignoring the low murmurs behind her. Kaelrix folded his arms. This was not cruelty, he told himself. It was instruction. If humans wished to stand among older civilizations, they would need to face their limitations. "Proceed," he said coolly. "Show us how your species approaches higher dimensional probability." Elena studied the board in silence. Then she did something no one expected. She didn't reach for the equation tools. She didn't request more data. She simply said, calmly, "The solution stabilizes at 62.9 repeating." The lecture hall went still. Kaelrix felt irritation spike through his neural lattice. "This is not an estimation," he said sharply. "It is a proof." Elena met his gaze, unflinching. "I know," she replied. "If you'd like, I can explain how I saw it." Kaelrix's refractive patterns darkened slightly, a Valar sign of restrained displeasure. "Saw it," he repeated. "Science is not vision, Miss Ward. It is logic." A few students emitted sounds of amusement. Elena nodded once. "Agreed. Logic is how you verify an answer. Not always how you find it." She lifted her hand, requesting access to the hollowboard. After a moment's hesitation, Kaelrix granted it. Curiosity had begun to edge out irritation. Instead of equations, Elena drew shapes. Not symbols, motions. She traced looping arcs that folded into themselves, then intersected, then drifted apart. The display filled with flowing forms that resembled currents in water or wind patterns across a planetary surface. "What you're calculating," she said, "is how uncertainty behaves when multiple possibilities interact across layers. You treat each dimension as a separate axis. Humans don't." Kaelrix frowned. "Then how do you manage complexity?" "We don't manage it," Elena said. "We feel it." That drew a reaction. A student from a logic-pure species raised a limb. "That is not a valid metric." Elena smiled, not unkindly. "It is if your survival depends on it." She continued shaping the display, layering the patterns until intersections began to glow. Humans evolved tracking moving systems, weather, prey, crowds, risk. We rarely had full data. So our brains learned to detect direction instead of certainty. She highlighted one convergence point. This system wants to settle here. You can prove it mathematically, and you should. But I don't need to run all the steps to know where it's going. Kaelrix stepped closer to the board. The shapes aligned disturbingly well with the underlying math. This approach lacks formal rigor, he said, though his voice had softened. It lacks formal presentation, Elena corrected. The rigor comes afterward. She overlaid a compressed proof, far shorter than the standard model. The system paused. Then the holoboard pulsed green. Correct. Optimized. A murmur swept through the hall. Kaelrix stared at the display, then at Elena. How long, he asked slowly, did this insight take you? Elena considered. A few seconds. Explaining it took longer. Silence followed. The students who had laughed earlier were no longer smiling. Kaelrix felt something unfamiliar, not defeat, but displacement. The foundation of his certainty had shifted. You did not calculate first, he said. No, Elena replied. I recognized the pattern. Calculation was confirmation. For the first time, Kaelrix wondered whether intelligence itself had more shapes than his people had ever catalogued. Kaelrix dismissed the class's murmurs with a raised limb, though he barely heard them himself. His mind raced, replaying the demonstration from multiple analytical perspectives. Each pass confirmed the same unsettling truth. The human's method worked. Not by accident. Not by luck. By design. Miss Ward, he said at last, his voice measured, your approach contradicts centuries of Valor pedagogy. Elena inclined her head. I'm not trying to replace it. Just add another door. That phrasing lingered. Kaelrix turned to the class. You assume intelligence is expressed through familiar structures. Through methods comfortable to your species. This assumption, he said slowly, may be flawed. Several students shifted uncomfortably. He faced Elena again. You were not inattentive during my lecture. No, she admitted. I was thinking about how the equations move. A realization settled over him, heavy and undeniable. I attempted to embarrass you, Kaelrix said. Because I believed humans relied on crude shortcuts. Elena didn't respond. She simply waited. I was wrong. The word sent a visible ripple through the hall. With your consent, Kaelrix continued, I wish to formally study this cognitive framework. Pattern-forward intuition may reveal efficiencies we have ignored. Elena nodded. As long as it's taught as a complement, not a replacement. A low wave of approval, translated as respectful acknowledgement, passed through the students. One raised a question. Instructor, does this mean humans think faster than us? Kaelrix considered. No, he said. It means they think sideways. He turned back to Elena. You may return to your seat. Anne, you may look out the viewport if you wish. A hint of laughter moved through the room. As Elena walked back, she noticed something new in the students' gazes. Not skepticism. Not pity. Curiosity. The lecture resumed, but it was no longer the same. Equations remained unchanged, yet now every student wondered what patterns they had been trained to ignore. After the session ended, Kaelrix stood alone in the empty hall, watching the nebula Elena had been observing earlier. Its shape was chaotic, yet undeniably coherent. He finally understood why it had held her attention. Humans had not survived by mastering the universe through precision alone. They had survived by adapting faster than their circumstances could destroy them. In the days that followed, Elena's method spread. Not as doctrine, but as possibility. Some species adopted visual modeling. Others experimented with intuitive forecasting. A few resisted entirely. But the galaxy had changed. For Caelrix, the lesson was personal. Intelligence, he realized, was not a hierarchy. It was an ecosystem. Different minds evolved to solve different problems, and the newest minds often saw paths the oldest had grown blind to. Elena remained human. Fallible. Limited. And quietly extraordinary. Because in a universe built on rigid certainty, she had reminded them all of something dangerous and powerful. There is more than one way to understand reality. And sometimes, the future belongs to those who see the pattern before the proof.